Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives, episode 142. Today, Hi-Fi and I will be introducing you to Dr. Ben Lockwood. He's an ecologist, and he's going to be talking to us about not only the hemorrhaging of expertise right now from America, but Earth's very existential crisis. Have a listen. Thank you so much, Dr. Ben Lockwood, for being with us today. I'm so excited for our viewers to get to hear from you. And before we jump in, can you just introduce yourself a bit to our audience and let them know your areas of expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm an ecologist at Penn State University. I'm also a geographer. I did my PhD in geography at Indiana University, and my research is primarily focused on forest ecology, but I do some work on ecological issues that overlap with economic issues and society and cultural issues, sort of what we refer to as nature-society relations.
Oh, you are our kind of guy here. So listen, before we go, jump into the topic that we brought you in for, I want to get your take on something that I think is very tragic. More than 2,100 staffers are resigning from NASA. And my big concern is that obviously one of the things that the United States has been known for is our climate modeling, our information that we put out globally that deals and addresses with climate change. I don't think our counterparts in Europe are as, have the capacity that we have had and proven that we have here through NASA. And when you hear of an institution like that hemorrhaging people, and this has been happening, of course, across the board, in your line of work, what does that mean to you, or what kind of alarm does that send out?
Yeah, well, immediately, it puts us in a reduced capacity to understand the changes that are going on to our climate. And it's part of a continued attack from the Trump administration on our scientific institutions. They're reducing the budgets at NASA, they're discrediting scientists at NASA, they're slashing budgets at the National Science Foundation, at the National Institute of Health, at the USDA, pretty much any site of infrastructure, scientific infrastructure is under attack from the Trump administration right now as part of their broader sort of anti-intellectual campaign that sort of underpins, I guess, the entire GOP platform at this moment. Um, it's said it's going to set us back. It's hard to even estimate how far it could set us back in terms of our scientific ability in this country to monitor these things, and it'll have economic impacts, it'll have health impacts. It's hard to overstate the seriousness of it. And with respect to the NASA specifically, I personally rely on some of that satellite data to do some of my own research. So it's an impacts that we're going to see. It could degrade our ability to model and forecast future things as far as climate or what's going on in our terrestrial ecosystems. There's a whole host of things, of negative consequences to this.
Thank you so much for that. It's very, very grave. And Europe is allocating hundreds of millions of dollars to bring over American scientists so they can continue their very important work. But it's just one in just many, many horrific things that continue to go on under this current administration. And High Fidelity, why don't you introduce the topic that had you reach out to Ben?
Well, the reason I wanted to talk to you, Ben, was, we had the just the absolute horror, the catastrophe, the destruction, the death in Texas. But we also experienced four 1 in 1,000 year storms across the United States. And it just seems like hurricanes are getting stronger, these disasters are getting worse, and yet we still hear people saying climate change isn't real. How would you talk to those people?
Yeah, well, I'm just to address sort of those types of statistics where you see like the catastrophe in Kerr County in Texas was I think a 1 in 1,000 year event. Um, and those sorts of events, climate change is just making those types of events more common. They're more likely to happen, and when they happen, they're more likely to be more severe than they have been in the past. And speaking to that specific event, a warming climate, you know, a climate with more energy or more temperature, higher temperatures, allows more water vapor to be absorbed into the atmosphere. It makes storms more intense. They can hold more rainfall and they can drop more rainfall in shorter periods of time. And, you know, when sea surface temperatures like in the Gulf are higher than normal, which, you know, they have been historically recently, the air that gets pushed over that, which what happened in Texas is that, yeah, you saw the slower moving air pushing over the Gulf in Texas. The sea surface temperatures were warmer, the atmosphere was warmer, more water vapor gets pulled up into the atmosphere, and then it gets dumped into an area that was already prone to these sort of flash floods. Denying it, you know, isn't going to change the reality of these situations. And, you know, when you're seeing 1 in 1,000, 1 in 5,000 year events happening every 5 to 10 years, you know, the math, yeah, what do you do? How do you reconcile that? You can't. Not that, you know, not that the people denying it are really interested in a coherent argument, but I think more and more people are recognizing the reality.
Thank you for that. And wasn't that also a case where there was more retraction with institutions that could have given us this knowledge in advance? I mean, I know that there's been a lot of commentary on that. And how do you see what occurred before this catastrophe that might have, mitigated some of the damage?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a complex set of scenarios that's confluence together to sort of produce the catastrophe there. Certainly, there's been cuts to weather monitoring. I don't think you can discount that, and I'm seeing, you know, reports of, you know, local officials making requests to state officials in Texas that were denied for funds. I've seen that the local officials may have denied or rejected funds from the federal government associated with the Biden administration. I think there's going to be, you know, blame enough to go around, but I think what it shows is that these types of disasters are in many ways not really natural disasters. I mean, they are in the sense that, you know, flooding occurs whether humans are around or not, but the damage that occurs because of a flooding, the loss of human life, the degree of catastrophe is as much a political equation. There's political implications, economic implications, as well as the physical things that contribute to it. On top of the fact that climate change is an anthropogenic factor as well. So I don't think you can separate the political choices from the physical conditions that produce the catastrophe.
That's such a brilliant answer. I did a deep dive on Mike Johnson a few years ago, and he's involved with this arc, this absolutely mythological, arc. And I'd have to review the material to remember, but maybe Hi-Fi, you can look it up. I believe it was in Kentucky. In any case, it's all denying reality. It's like people go on this tour and they see people playing with the dinosaurs, and everything is just not the facts of the reality as we know it, the science as we know it. And what really concerns me as I, hear your responses, is that, you know, when I have reviewed authoritarian movements and autocratic capture, often it starts A, with the silencing of truth, but B, with the persecution of experts, of scientists. You can't have the leader undermined by reality when they're trying to sell cult dynamics. And if America keeps on hemorrhaging, staffers who have this incredibly profound knowledge, and all the scientists that we rely on, the academics we rely on. What do you think would be kind of like some of the immediate ramifications of that?
Yeah, I think this goes back to, you know, what I was mentioning earlier is our reduced capacity to respond to some of these things, to plan for them. If we accept that there are political choices that contribute to these consequences, then I think our ability to, mitigate those on any scale is being directly attacked. When you're firing scientists, when you're discrediting them, you're right. It's part of a long-standing, it's not new to this Trump administration. The previous Trump administration did it as well. And I don't think it's just political forces. I think that, it's economic forces as well. There's lots of money to be made. The fossil fuel industry uh, has many vested interests in keeping things the way they are. And as the number one contributor to global climate change, that's the industry that has had a long-standing campaign of discrediting science, of discrediting climate change science, even though they've known about the science themselves for decades. They were some of the first to put out in terms of some of these fossil fuel companies. I don't remember off the top of my head what the first one was, but some of their scientists put out models about what the effects of pumping CO2 into the atmosphere would be, and their initial models from decades ago are not that far off from what is happening now. So they've known about this
Oh
for a
my
long
God.
time. And have been launching a campaign, similar to kind of like the tobacco lobby taking
Yeah.
some of their playbooks. So yeah, it's not new.
It's just so important. I remember I kind of did a deep dive on the Koch brothers and the Koch family and the father, and they are, among the people who have spent billions interfering with our understanding of reality when it comes to climate change, for the reasons that you just mentioned. Hi-Fi, jump in.
Um, so I follow you on Substack, and one of the things you posted on Substack was you better start believing in class war because you're in one. And I've tried to make this point to our audience for years now that what we are seeing is billionaires in technology. And let's take into account the fact that these massive data centers that these companies are building, they suck up energy. It's amazing how much energy you look at Elon Musk. He is using I forget what it was, methane generators to
Hmm.
power his data centers and
Yeah.
poisoning the community around him. So just go into that, go into the class war, the technology billionaires, the petroleum billionaires. I mean, pretty much any billionaire, a shipping billionaire, like a trucking, like Uline, right? I mean, yeah. So
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about that.
absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, so what you're referring to there, just I guess if your audience isn't familiar, the one of the data centers that powers Grok, I guess is what they call it, the Twitter X, I guess now, AI is built in a community near Memphis. And so it's a primarily black and less wealthy neighborhood, and it's just spewing the toxic fumes. They use methane or gas to power it. And so that's one of the ways that I think AI is a great representation of how these things are connected in terms of class war and environmental issues, because as you point out, these data centers are huge, uh, require huge amounts of resources, both in terms of the electricity that they need and the water that they need to cool the computing that goes on. And so they're hoarding lots and lots of water from areas, and they're building these things. Memphis is not the only one. They're building one here in Pennsylvania soon. Amazon's building it. They're building them all over the place. They require massive amounts of energy, and our grid is not decarbonized. So when you're talking about using massive amounts of energy, primarily that's fossil fuel energy. They're hoarding water resources, which if you're in the West, those are already water scarce communities, and most of their water has been privatized. And the communities that have to live in these areas are overwhelmingly working class neighborhoods. They don't put these in the wealthiest, they're not putting these in the Hamptons or, like wherever, the wealthy people live are not going to have a data center, probably not going to have one put right in their next door. So it's working class families that have to live in these areas. It's usually working class areas that have to work in places. And it's also working class people that are being attacked directly by the AI industry because these technologies are being developed for reducing labor costs, right? I mean, they don't use that language. They use the language of increasing efficiency, but what does that mean? It means lowering their labor costs. We're already seeing massive layoffs in across the tech sector. And I think that's just the first aspect of this. Anywhere that they can implement this technology to save money, to increase profit, to lay off more people, that's what they're going to do. So it's an attack on the working class directly in terms of reducing labor power, and it's an attack on the environment because these things overwhelmingly use fossil fuel energy. They suck up water, they pollute the environment, they contribute to climate change, and climate change itself is externalized to less wealthy people here domestically, and even more so abroad. So I don't think you can separate these issues of working class issues from environmental issues, and I think AI is a perfect example of that.
This is just a brilliant conversation, and I just want you to take a moment and please tell our viewers a bit more about your Substack. It looks like it is Ben Lockwood, PhD, brief ecology, and what are some of the things that you are trying to highlight with your work?
Yeah, sure. It's at briefecology.com. This is the best place to go to find it. I've got
Great.
it's one newsletter, but I've got sort of a couple different versions that go out. One is what I call the Eco Update, and it's bi-weekly, and it sort of just covers recent ecological studies, but usually I'm putting multiple studies in conversation with each other and putting that in broader societal context and sort of talking about the impacts. I usually have a section in there that's kind of like, major stories in the news that you may have missed or forgotten about because, it's a 24-hour cycle at this point. And
Yeah,
I
right.
usually try to highlight an organization that's doing some activist work on these fronts, because when you're hitting
Great.
people with doom and gloom nonstop, I try to include, here's something you can do. I do some other stuff. I highlight eco fiction is something I read a lot, so I put in some reviews. But I would say the bulk of what I'm doing there is sort of talking about the political and economic issues that I feel contribute to these ecological and climatological crises that we're seeing. I personally think capitalism is the number one cause of climate change. I don't think you can separate the economic drive for nonstop growth, nonstop profit,
Yep.
from the impacts that it has. So that's sort of the angle that I take with the newsletter in general.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I literally just became a subscriber while we were having the conversation. I
Oh,
try
thanks
to
so much. Yeah,
support as
all the listeners,
many
go ahead and subscribe.
I try to support as many Substackers as I can because we have to find and identify experts in truth right now, and it is so incredibly vital. I have a question. Is there something you wanted to say? Because I wanted to jump in on something.
No, go ahead.
Well, what he just said about capitalism being the number one driver of climate change is so important. And I had worked at Al Jazeera America on a show called Techno. I was one of a couple of producers doing things a decade ago that really did deep dives on climate change, climate justice, reforesting, reforestation that was happening in like places like Costa Rica and everything from like the trouble with plastics, which is something that everybody thinks they can just throw something in a bin and a magical fairy will recycle it, and in fact this stuff sticks around. So my mind was really expanded and blown during this period of time because I really understood how much effort is expended on making sure people don't understand this type of reality. And I asked a data scientist yesterday. One of the things that we would do is interview the expert that the fossil fuel industry would put in front of us. And that was somebody who was usually being paid a couple $1 million a year. And they would put up their data. And, they may have gone to Harvard and had all the credentials, but they were refuting what, other experts were saying. And um, when you as kind of a student of all of this, see those kinds of people, what kind of goes through your mind? Because they're very effective at delaying the type of, change and urgency that we needed. We've had all these moments. We could have had Al Gore, but we didn't. We had all these moments. And when you know that there's just, someone out there with their own PowerPoint on, data that refutes reality, like kind of what does
CO2
that
is
do
good
to
for
somebody like
trees.
you? Yes, like what does it do? What does it do?
Yeah, so I could have so much that I could say about this. Um, First of all, yeah, I think the what you're seeing is the power of capital in terms of, the
Mm,
ability of them
yeah.
to develop entire ecosystems of disinformation. They're
Mhm.
able to support with fractions of their money, to develop their own podcasts, to put out their own science, essentially. They have their own think tanks. A lot of it is
Mhm.
debunked science. It's junk
Mhm.
science, but that doesn't really matter to them because, the average person, does not have the capability or time
Yeah.
or interest in going through all these things that they claim. When you actually sort of listen to the variety of claims that they make about climate change, it's pretty interesting because there's zero consistency in it. They'll take opposing positions to their own things uh, at
Mhm.
different times, and there's no coherence or consistency. But that doesn't matter because, for one, you may not be hearing, the bulk of their arguments at once. Two, they're the people they're talking to are not really interested in good faith arguments. They're not making good faith arguments for sure. Um, and so yeah, it's interesting. So I do
Yeah.
one thing I would mention is, I'm not super into the podcast world, but since I'm on a podcast right now, I will mention another fantastic one is the Climate Deniers Playbook. I don't know
Ooh,
if you're familiar with that, but it's a couple of
no.
they're comedians, but they also have advanced degrees in urban planning and like environmental engineering. They're very entertaining and they do a fantastic job of sort of every episode is like breaking down one of these common like CO2 is good for
Great.
plants sort of myths, and they very much do a fantastic job of detailing in very thorough research why those are false.
Ah, that sounds incredible. High five. Got one more before we let him go, but you jump in.
I just I look around the world and I look at the fact that Trump just he got rid of sanctions on Russia, and like the number one name on that list was Gazprom. And we talk about capitalism and we talk about, these extractive industries, the petroleum industry, these are all extractive, right? One's extracting gas from the ground, or oil from the ground, one's extracting data from people. It seems to me that the cost for these people to cut down trees, drill wells, etc., is not commensurate with the damage they do to our ecosphere. How would you go about if you had to like charge somebody to cut down tree, how would you go about assigning a cost to what they're taking from us and what they're destroying in our planet?
Yeah, there's different ways of approaching this. There's ideological ways in looking at, what is the meaning that these things have to the communities around them. There are some actual quantitative approaches that people have taken in terms of trying to create sort of social costs of climate change and things like that. In terms of determining a cost, I think well, I don't necessarily think about it that way. I usually think about it as what is the motivation for doing these things, and the motivation in a capitalist global economy is profit, right? And if you want to break that down further, the goal of any extractive industry that creates some product is not to create a product to fulfill a need. The goal is to create a product that will have some exchange value on the market, to sell it for more than what it costs them to produce it, right? I mean, that's the whole goal. And so it really doesn't matter if society needs this thing that they produce. It matters if they can convince someone to buy it. So, they have um, highly developed marketing schemes that manipulate people. Every day you're on a social media network, you're bombarded with ads for things that you don't need. That's an aspect of it where they create their own demand, but obviously capitalism runs into its own crises of overproduction as well. So that's part of the reason why you have this what's called artificial scarcity. We have the technology and the materials and the knowledge to feed the world, to produce enough resources for the world, for the entire planet to live reasonably comfortable lives. But so it's not a knowledge issue. It's an economic issue, and that it's not profitable to do that, right? You need to introduce artificial scarcity of these things. And the damage, the environmental damage is part of that. It's called externalization, is what we usually refer to this in capitalism. We externalize the environmental costs domestically to less wealthy neighborhoods, like going back to what we were talking about, where pollution occurs, where it's most risky to live are often, low income areas because those are the people, those are the only areas they can afford to live. But we do this internationally as well. The beef industry is a great example of this. We're cutting down massive amounts of the Amazon rainforest so that you can replace it with cattle livestock or palm oil. And these are things that, we don't necessarily need. You don't need to eat beef that often, certainly not as often as we do in the global north. And so, yeah, I think it's all part of the broader economic system of capitalism.
Thank you so much. I have two quick lightning round questions for you.
Okay.
One would be when I was producing a lot of the material that dealt with climate change and climate catastrophe uh, kind of projections, I had a producer that I worked with who turned to me and she said, "We're the problem. We can't just say it's the oil industry. We're the problem because we keep demanding the product. We are not getting off the product." And I really thought about that. And I decided my first commitment would be working close to home because that would help. And my second commitment would be working from home because then I would be reducing my carbon footprint. And I know you'd have to scale it up. But I thought, maybe you have some like bullet point suggestions on what people can do because no one's coming to save us. And things just went really bad in America. And you've got somebody who's actively sabotaging science and actively, re-engaging with, like you said, with Russian oil. And so, what can people do to sort of take ownership of this problem as best they can?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's a lot of I don't know. It can be somewhat of a controversial question because I think personally, taking an individualistic approach to this is probably not going to have an impact that we need it to have. And in fact, many would claim that the idea of an individual carbon footprint itself is a product of greenwashing, fossil fuel sort of misinformation. The fact that Elon Musk can hop on a private jet and emit more fossil fuels in a week, than a family would in its entire lifetime kind of negates, whatever you could do on an individual level. So I think we need collective action. I think we need organizing. I think the issue is capitalism. I don't think you can sustainably consume your way out of a problem that capitalism created. So I personally think we have to overcome this economic system that structurally reinforces these problems of climate change and creates these problems of climate change. So I don't think there's a recycle your way out of it. Now,
Yeah,
I'm not saying we shouldn't recycle,
yeah,
things like that. But
yeah.
yeah, I think it takes collective action.
No, no, yeah, that was such a brilliant answer. And
It wasn't much of a lightning round answer, sorry.
it's funny. No, no, no. It's great. It's funny because what obviously happens, the knee-jerk reaction and all of those, and the Trumpocene will be like, oh, you're a communist. And I always remind people we've never even seen what communism would really look like because it's always been totalitarianism. So we haven't
Right.
even
Yeah.
seen the
Right.
possibility of it.
That's a whole
My,
other
my,
podcast we can
that's a
completely.
whole other podcast. But my last question for you is that why stick your neck out and why do this work in a time when academics and experts are being silenced? And quite frankly, we have Hi-Fi and I have friends who have just, left and now they're doing their work in Canada and elsewhere. Why stick your neck out? Because this administration is showing all the signs, and obviously they're already doing many, many cruel things, but I just want to know what's in you that drives you to actually stick your neck out during this time.
Well, I think someone has to. I think that's the short answer is, you can sit around and wait for it to happen, but you just have to do it. And um, yeah, I've been a union organizer and someone who's been active on the left for a while, so it's not sort of new activity for me to be sort of ruffling feathers on that sort of thing. Um, and to be a scientist, I one of the hardest things right now is to do all this work and put all this work into your research and then have it disappear into a black hole because no one has any interest in doing anything with it. So that's one of the reasons I started, the Substack was that I wanted to have a more direct conversation with people that I think need this, and the communities on the right have well-established networks. The left, I think, needs much, much more of this kind of thing.
Thank you so much. Hi-Fi, last question.
It's not really a question. It's just one thing I try to do, and my kids are into it. We have at least one vegetarian meal a week. And
Mhm.
I know you were talking to some people about beans, and I've got a Turkish lentil soup that'll blow your mind.
Oh, okay. You gotta hit me with that recipe. Yeah, I love beans. I've developed sort of I'm known for it now. It's a thing, is that I'm a big fan of beans. So yeah.
Yeah, dude, we got to go to
Wonderful.
Detroit sometime. The vegetarian scene in Detroit, amazing.
Nice.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Uh,
Detroit's a cool play. Yeah, I haven't been there in a while, but yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Oh, I love Detroit too. And Hi-Fi spent time in New Orleans as well. And he can cook and he makes the best coffee in the world. So take him up on it. He's the
Okay.
real deal. Dr. Ben Lockwood, thank you so much for being with us today. Is there anything we forgot to ask or something else you'd like to notify our viewers about?
I don't think so. I think we covered most of what I would have mentioned is that I would just reiterate that I don't think these are individual. I think you can really get into a sort of situations of guilt and thinking like, oh, I'm not doing enough, and can produce this sort of crippling anxiety about the overwhelmingness of the problem. And I'm not here to really spread a doomerist sort of it's too late sort of message. I would say that, whatever issue it is that you're concerned about, especially if it's environmental or ecological, there are organizations out there working on it. There are people working collectively already on it. So the challenge is not to find out what you can do, is to join up with the people who are already doing the work.
Oh, I love that. What a great message. Thank you so much for being here. And High
Having me.
Fidelity, thank you so much for putting this together.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.